One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. I'm here at the 2018 Women Leaders in College Sports National Convention, and I'm joined by Tanya Vogel. Tanya is the Director of Athletics and Recreation at George Washington University. Greetings, Tanya. Thanks.
It's great to be here.
Now, Tanya, you've been in college athletics for 21 years, including 15 as a coach, right, and spent time at a number of different places. But about 5 or 6 years ago, you realized that something had been developing in your brain in terms of leadership, and you call it empathic leadership. Can you tell us what that means? Give us a definition of that from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. While I was out at Northern Arizona, and I was working as a sport administrator for the first time in my life, I was realizing that as a leader specific to head coaches, I recognized that because of my experience of being in their shoes, it was easy for me to relate to them. And so when I think about, or when I was formulating the definition of empathic leadership, it was the ability to really get into somebody else's shoes and to recognize what it is that they're going through day to day. And if you really try to put that on, it gives you a starting point for how you're going to work with them. If you understand how things are impacting them, whether it's student athletes or parents or opponents or even the weather, right? If you can understand that, you can help them as a leader.
Now, I'd imagine it didn't start when you had sport oversight. I mean, you being a coach probably thought like that when you were actually coaching student athletes, I'd imagine.
Sure. Again, when you're coaching a sport of soccer, you have 30 student athletes, and every single one of them comes from a different place. In some ways, you want to be consistent, right? You want to treat people equally, but if you treat everybody the same, you're going to get different results. And so, you're probably right. When you're working with different athletes every single year and you realize that different things make them tick, you're trying to figure out what that thing is. And by putting yourself in their shoes, it really helps. Here's the other thing about empathic leadership. Sometimes when a student athlete or a head coach isn't doing the thing that you want them to do, you can take it personally. All of a sudden you think, well, that student athlete's rebelling, right? Or that head coach isn't listening to me. Empathic leadership actually allows you to make it so it's not personal, right? That person's not doing what I want them to do, not because personally they're trying to rebel, but something else is going on. And so being an empathic leader, you're trying to figure out what is that thing that's going on in their life. What are they experiencing, and then how can I help them through it?
That was probably very important when you were a coach with student athletes, young people going through the things they go through.
Absolutely. But you know what, Ty? It's as important with head coaches. I think about some of my most recent conversations with people, and again, they might respond in a way that doesn't make sense to me, and it might even fire me up a little bit. But when I sit down and I ask them the question like, hey, what's going on? You find out that something's going on at home. They're doing a renovation project at their house and it's not going well, and that they're bringing that to work. And so figuring out what's going on in their life, figuring out what they're experiencing really helps me as I try to make leadership decisions.
So you get to Northern Arizona, you realize you have this philosophy that you've been working on for years, and it's coming to fruition now that you have sport oversight, overseeing coaches, overseeing quote-unquote adults. Was there a point when you actually put pen to paper and saying, you know what, as I grow in my profession and start leading people, this is how I'm going to lead, and here are some thoughts on it? Like, did you ever come to that point where it actually became something that you wrote down and said, hey, this is me, this is my style here?
Yeah, great question, especially since we're at Women Leaders. So 3 years ago, I was asked to do a TED Talk on sports supervision, right? And as I was putting together my slides, I actually stumbled upon I kept coming back to this word empathy, right? So I looked up the definition of empathy, and it's interesting to me because when you look up the background or where the word comes from, it comes from Greek, and it means everything from like physical affection and suffering And when you think about it that way, like here's this word empathy, and you think about suffering or feeling like the other human, it's pretty wild. And so it was during the preparation for that TED Talk that I started to put pen to paper and realize that I really am an empathic leader.
Yeah, right. And this is actually a thing. And this is
it's a thing, yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's excellent. So back in January, you were named interim athletics director or director of athletics and recreation there at George Washington University. Of course, now you're the full-time director of athletics. Now you're managing sports, staff, you're leading student athletes, you're reporting to whoever you report to there on campus. It's just there's a whole new aspect of running a whole organization. And you know how you want to lead. You have this empathic leadership. Tell me about implementing that in an organizational fashion in terms of a whole organization.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because it is one thing to do it yourself, and it's one thing to do it based on some experiences that I've already had. Like I mentioned, I was a student athlete, I was a coach, and so some of it comes naturally. And then you recognize, wait a second, I'm going to hold people responsible for leading in a similar fashion. I better talk to them about it. And I credit Peter Roby a lot. Peter Roby is former AD at Northeastern because of the work that he did with me during the Pathway program. He talked a lot about being a values-driven leader. And so, my work with Peter was, Tanya, you got to really understand what your values are, and then you lead through them. And if one of my values is respect, and I believe that empathy and respect kind of go hand in hand, then I've got to lead that way. So I did a similar thing with my organization. Our three values within our organization are determination, commitment, and respect. And so very early on, January, February, March, April, we just started talking about those values again, what they mean, what they look like. And we spent the better part of those 4 months really hung up on respect and talking about what that means for our student athletes, what that means for our coaches, what that means for our staff. And Ty, I think for all of us who are leaders, when you set the expectation and then you provide the support and resources for people to meet that expectation, the kind of final part of that is that you hold them accountable. And that's where I am right now. We've defined what our values are. We've talked about what they look like. And now at times we got to hold each other accountable. I'll share with you something. One of my first all-staffs, I handed out a Harvard Business Review article on addressing incivility in the workplace. And what I said to my staff was, listen, my expectation is that we are going to treat people in a civil manner. And when we don't, we need to hold each other accountable in a respectful manner. And so that's how I brought it to life, by talking about our values, by making it as clear as possible for the people in my organization as to what's going to be acceptable and what's not, and then holding one another accountable.
So you mentioned that your third value, respect, it has taken some time to hash out an agreement on what that means because it's so important and many people may have different ideas on what it means. Can you tell me the details of actually hashing that out between the staffs and so many personalities and so many definitions of respect compared to what you think it is, but you also want to know what your staff thinks it is and how can you come to a conclusion?
Great question. So we've been working on this for a while. We started at an all-staff meeting and split them into small group tables. And I actually asked them to write it down on pieces of paper. So we gathered about 20 different actionable items that defined what respect was, and we gathered about 20 things that defined what respect is not, or what a lack of respect would look like. And then from there, we went out to all of our constituents, so student athletes, head and assistant coaches, senior staff, all staff, and even some of our donors. And we put those same 20 things in front of them and asked them to narrow it down to 3 things that really define what respect looks like in the athletic department. And we challenged them because we said these definitions have to work for student athletes, for coaches, for opponents, for officials, for everybody. You can't have a respect looks like this for a student athlete and it looks like this for a head coach. You can't have that. So it was a lot of work, but we involved a really large group of our constituents, and very valuable work. And in some ways, Ty, that means, we've worked through this together. It's been very thoughtful. We had a lot of eyes on it. We finally got to a place where we feel very good about what it means to show respect.
It's interesting, respect, and holding somebody accountable to that. The things that cross your desk are most likely when somebody is not giving respect. So how, as you mentioned, right, expectation with evaluation, standards of performance, how we hold you accountable, how do you evaluate when somebody's doing well at respect, when somebody's using that empathic leadership? How do you evaluate that amongst your staff? Is there a tangible way to even evaluate that?
Well, I think we have this, our hashtag's raise high. It was probably a year and a half ago we started talking about raising higher. So it's like, hey, we're raising high, we're winning conference championships, but we want to do more, we want to raise higher. Well, I took the ER and we started talking about excellence recognized. And it's the way that we do shout outs at our all staffs. I put up a slide that says raise higher, and then we talk about excellence recognized, ER. And so I think that's part of it, is acknowledging when you see an act that showcases respect. And that could be everything from you see an act of good sportsmanship and you do a shout out to either the coach or the student that showcase that. Or, this in athletic department, there's always opportunities to volunteer. There's always opportunities to show up and support a team. We've got 27 sports. So when somebody shows up, being able to shout out, hey, that was an awesome show of respect. You showed up at a 6 o'clock rowing practice in the dead of winter, right? So using platforms and opportunities to recognize that excellence is one way that you can acknowledge when somebody's living up to that value of respect.
People notice those type of things. I wonder you always have people who like to do what they like to do very low key, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need everybody to know that I'm out here showing respect and that I'm showing up and supporting people and all these kind of things and being an empathic leader. How would you evaluate that? I mean, if nobody knows, he knows or she knows what she's doing, and the person she's done it with probably knows. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so again, a cool thing about empathy is trying to figure out what the shoes that they're walking in and how they want to be recognized. Some people want to be recognized with a high five or a hug, right? Or a handwritten note of appreciation. So I think part of it is really trying to get to know your staff. The other part of it, it's a good word because it's all over this convention, is empowerment. You empower your people to recognize. I had a staff member that works for one of my associate EDs, and she took the time. She wrote me an email about how awesome her boss is. Now, her boss is one of those people. She's a humble leader. She doesn't like a lot of public recognition. And this employee of hers, I feel, was empowered to write the athletic director a really long email, telling, basically showing examples of how this associate ED was living up to our values. So I think there's different ways to do it, really trying to get to know your employees and how they want to be recognized, and then empowering staff to recognize, because it can't always be one person, the athletic director, doing it. But if you empower your staff and your students to do shout outs to one another, it can be really positive.
One of my last questions here, it's been since January, so we're going on, in the chair, right? Whether full-time or intern, we're going on 10, 11 months here. It has to be rewarding if you see a staff embodying empathic leadership. It's probably hard for an athletic director to sleep at night, but I imagine that you can sleep at night when you know that this has been implemented and people understand the value of it.
Here's what I would say. I don't think the work that we do is rocket science, right? I still think it's really important work. If anything, we're potentially transforming the lives of the next rocket scientist, so that's pretty cool. But that being said, the work that we do is hard, right? Our hours are crazy. We work 7 days a week. We work 360 plus days a year. And so when you're building a culture and you're trying to get people to understand that they're a part of something big, I feel when you're doing it right, people are really bought in and they're really into it. Well, that means that there's an intensity to it, and so they can take things personally. And sometimes you want them to take things personally, but I feel with empathic leadership, it takes a little of that out of it and says, I'm actually trying to figure out who you are. I'm trying to figure out what I can do to make your life better. And so again, I said it's an intense industry. We're working really hard. We're tired sometimes. And if you can take out that level of, man, that person did that because they
don't like
because
me,
of what reason?
yeah.
They don't like me. They don't respect me, whatever it might be. If you can take it out of it and say, wait, why did they do that? Because certainly they're living in our values, so why did they do that? They must have something else going on. And if I can get my staff to take that one step further and really try to figure out who each other is, I think we can do some great things at GW.
Well, this has been an excellent conversation, Tanya. I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Thanks, Ty.
That was Tanya Vogel. She's a director of athletics and recreation at George Washington University. Of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.